When the person who is the most important regulator of the financial industry relies on huge financial institutions to write their own regulations, something is terribly amiss. That is why Tim Geithner is about to be asked a lot of questions. As the LIBOR rate manipulation scandal continues to spread, Geithner last week tried to prove he was ahead of the curve by drawing attention to a memo he sent out in 2008 warning banks about the need to reform LIBOR. However, upon closer examination, the memo was nothing more than a regurgitation of recommendations made by, you guessed it, giant banks. If that sounds like a paradox, it is. One that is at the heart of the depressing state of affairs of our current financial regulatory system. Joining me now are two men all too familiar with that state of affairs: Dennis Kelleher, the president and CEO of Better Markets, Inc., and Matt Taibbi, contributing editor to Rolling Stone magazine, the author of more important metaphors than anybody in history about finance. Thank you both so much for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
Hi, Eliot.
Dennis, let me start with you. This revelation that the memo that Tim Geithner wrote was really nothing more than a sequence of cut and paste from the bank's memo. And then there was no follow-up, which is perhaps even the worst part. What do you make of all this?
Well, you know, sadly, it's hardly news that the New York Fed was doing the bidding of the banks. You know, one of the biggest problems we had in the lead-up to the crisis was all these regulators were essentially captives to the banks and the Wall Street generally, and they understood their job really as servicing the banks and being their advocate. So it's just another example of one of the most fundamental problems we had that created the crisis, and it's one of the reasons when we were drafting the new reform law of trying to figure out how to put some real strong teeth into the laws and the regulation so that over time we wouldn't revert back to what we see here, which is, you know, they're not even scribes. They just copy it and send it in, and you don't have to follow up unless one of the banks rings you up to say, why don't you do that again?
Yeah, no, it is shocking. I mean, Matt, you have written, you know, I don't think you're one of these guys who sees conspiracy behind every event in life. On the other hand, you have seen the reality of this sort of convergence of power, the banks, the regulators. When you look at what the New York Fed did, sending out one memo, but then nothing after that, how do you interpret it?
Well, I think it's striking that both the New York Fed and apparently the Bank of England were both informed of this scandal directly in 2008. We know that at the very least, and that this illegal activity continued for at least a year or a year and a half after that. So that should scare a lot of people, that the two primary regulators of the international financial community were apprised of this activity dating back a long way, and nothing apparently was done about it, which should tell people an awful lot. It should tell people that those two regulators are actually potentially part of this scandal.
Right. And look, we don't know how to interpret the evidence in the conversation. Certainly over in England, Barclays is affirmatively saying the Bank of England told them to continue this. Now, I guess we should separate out. There are really two separate rationales for what was going on. One was banks understating their LIBOR costs, not to get too wonky, to make themselves look stronger in the 2008 context. The other was a simple gaming of the process to manipulate the LIBOR rate so that their bets on which way interest rates would go would make more money. The Fed apparently knew about both pieces of this because it knew about the LIBOR gaming before the 2008 crisis, right, Dennis? And so there's absolutely no justification.
Well, right. I mean, it's very important that we keep it clear that there really are two phases to what is an egregious, broad-based scandal among the biggest banks in the world. You know, before the crisis, they were doing it for no purpose other than to defraud their counterparties and anybody else they could rip off, basically consistent with their business model at the time. So it's not that it's not a rate rigging scandal. This is actually a criminal conspiracy, and you know how these things work, Eliot. But a criminal conspiracy among the biggest banks in the world for no purpose other than to rip people off across the world. And yes, at a point in time we had a financial crisis, and then there was an issue of trying to avoid Iran and all these other excuses and smoke that you may think could justify the behavior or excuse it in some extent. But the core of this is a criminal conspiracy among people knowingly violating some of the most basic laws outlawing fraud, conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, etc., which is why the next step we better see very soon, and if we don't, it's going to be a sad day for this country, is they ought to be slapping some handcuffs on these traders in the next couple of weeks and putting them in federal court, because you know what you have to do. Handcuffs, arrest them, squeeze them, get some information, handcuffs, squeeze them, and move up the chain.
Yep, that's exactly right. Now, Matt, there was an article over the weekend that the Justice Department, one presumes they leaked this because somehow it ended up one person went down and said, yes, we're preparing criminal cases. Obviously, they're trying to say we're being tough. By the end of the year, how that will be timed in terms of the election, who knows, who cares? Let's not get political yet. But how can there only be one criminal case? Obviously, there's a vast conspiracy. One criminal case would almost be a statement that we're not serious about making criminal cases.
Well, first of all, it can't be just one bank. By its very nature, this scandal has to involve multiple banks. So if it's only one company or one individual, that tells you that the scandal has been, the scope of this investigation has been artificially narrowed. But if you can't put somebody in jail for manipulating an $800 trillion market, what can you put them in jail for? I mean, in the rest of America, outside of Wall Street, it's pretty easy to go to jail in America. And if they can't send somebody to jail for this, that's an incredible statement.
Look, Matt's dead right. No, I mean, this is an open and shut case. You know, a first-year law student ought to be able to rack up a bunch of convictions here in no time at all. I mean, you don't even have to be that smart. Their own words in the emails and the voicemails can get convictions across the board and up the chain.
You know, I just want to clear, you're a lawyer, so you're not just speaking disparagingly of lawyers because you're an accountant or something. You spend a fair number of years practicing, so you're saying this out of well-founded understanding of how little it actually takes.
Boy, I wish I had cases that were slam dunks like this when I practiced law. You know, this is egregious criminal conduct that needs to be hit pretty hard and pretty fast. One of the reasons this keeps happening, as Matt keeps documenting, is because there's never been any accountability on Wall Street. Wall Street's a high-crime area, and the criminals are just let to run free. This would never be tolerated anywhere else in America, and it's time to end the two sets of laws. We apply laws to everybody in this country, and we pamper Wall Street. We don't apply the laws. We don't apply the criminal laws. We don't apply the civil laws. And it's past time to stop. The American people get it. They know they're getting special treatment. This is one of those times, I think, that the facts are so outrageous that even though this administration and others who have shown no interest in enforcing the law are going to be forced to do it.
30 seconds. Matt, last word to you. We have laws about recidivists and street crime out on the street. I was a prosecutor. Why don't we do that for banks? Second time, boom, handcuffs go on. You lose your corporate license.
Well, that's what's so amazing about this. We've seen over and over again, they ask these banks, they let them off with a promise never to do it again, and then they do it 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and it's the same deal every time. I don't know how they keep getting the same deal every time.
All right, next time you guys are on, we'll take bets how many indictments there are between now and Election Day, and then how many between Election Day and the end of December. All right, Dennis Kelleher, President and CEO of Better Markets, Inc., Matt Taibbi, contributing editor at Rolling Stone. Thank you both for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eliot.
My take on my interview from